This is Tall Tale TV, your podcast for sci-fi and fantasy short stories. Of Tyrants and Teakettles by Lesley Herron. Chapter 26, Odysseia.
You insufferable piece of scrap iron!
Elias visibly shook with anger as the realization crashed over him. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides so tight that his nails drew blood.
Do you have any idea what you've done, or how many years of tireless work you've just unraveled?
There was something so pleasant about watching a stoic man's personal defenses crumble in rage. Pulling a page from Chester's book, Vel allowed a lazy smile to curl his features and plastered it there. To be honest, he couldn't fight the twinge of delight he felt as he watched Elias's face contort through a roller coaster of emotions. He gave the Inquisitor a simple shrug.
It probably took you a lot longer to build it than it took me to bring it all down.
A tumultuous clang rattled among the chaos of the university. Something large had impacted the side of the building, causing the walls to shudder. Cannon fire. Vel looked up to see a single stream of dust fall from a crack in the ceiling. He returned his gaze to meet those familiar ice-blue eyes.
Sounds like the rebellion has secured a few siege weapons.
He chewed on his tongue for a moment before the smile on his face widened.
I guess it really will be brick by brick.
Comedy chanced to glance over her shoulder, her platinum blonde hair whipping around. Sir, they're breaking through the gates. We should move. Now! Elias felt his rage reach a boiling point. He could no longer fight the impulsive urge to break something in Vel's face. He reached out and snagged a hold of the cyborg by the collar of his, apparently stolen, military coat. Everything he had worked for, the peace and prosperity he had brought to all his people, was so easily undone by this one smug man who wore his brother's face. Vel glanced down at the hands wound tightly around the lapel of his coat.
You know, there's still time. Time enough for you to put a stop to all of this.
He looked back up, locking eyes with the Inquisitor. Something tugged at him from somewhere deep inside, and like a cable pulled taut with too much weight, Elias snapped. A red-hot rage filled his vision, and he slammed the cyborg against the wall, hard. His body shook in anger as he leaned in close, that fire fueled on by that unwavering smile.
I should have known you'd be just as infuriating as my own little brother.
His words came out toxic and dangerous as they passed through grit teeth. Vel's smile twitched with disdain.
And what would your brother have to say about you sacrificing innocent lives for your own gain?
Elias froze, finally finding the resolve to push down his anger. He relinquished his grip on the cyborg and took half a step back, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose as he did.
Oh, my brother isn't saying much these days, I'm sure.
He let the implication hang in the air for just a moment before turning his attention to his guards.
You two stay here and keep him occupied. I will return to my shop and get those other machines up. Find me once he's been dealt with.
Vel reached out and grabbed Elias by the elbow.
Stop! Please, for your own...
Elias spun and slammed a clenched fist into the other man's face, his fury breaking past the point of control. Color popped in Vel's vision as his head snapped back, cracking hard against the wall. He knew antagonizing this man was a dangerous game, and one that came with a price, but he had to keep him distracted to give Atticus and Chester as much time as he could. He took in a sharp breath through his nostrils and forced the lazy smile back onto his face. Elias pulled back for another punch, and another. He pummeled the man relentlessly until his knuckles were sore and bleeding from impacting the small metal panels that made up portions of the cyborg's face. The building shook again from cannon fire, but he pushed through the pain, venting his anger and frustrations with every blow. "Sir," Comedy repeated, reaching out to grab the Inquisitor. "We have to get you out of here, now!" As if he was snapped back to his senses, Elias regained his composure with a long intake of breath. He stepped back from Vel and watched as he slumped, limp against the wall. Despite the mess he had made of the cyborg's face, that smug smile was still visible. He had made no attempt to halt the attack and no retaliation of his own. A sneer pulled at Elias's features.
And here I was, hoping you'd turn out to be less of a disappointment than my own brother.
He spat on the ground.
But I suppose that's something hardwired into your character.
Elias turned to his masked guards and watched as another stream of dust fell from the roof as the building shook.
Handle this.
He gestured to the wheezing creature at his feet.
If they break through the front gates, abandon him to the mob and join me in my shop. I do not wish to use force against my own citizens, but they've left me no choice.
Vel blinked a few times as he worked his jaw carefully, checking to make sure it wasn't dislocated. A throbbing pain set in behind his left eye, and he was certain his nose was broken. He pushed himself up until he was standing, his back pressed firmly against the wall.
We aren't done talking yet. Yes, we are.
Elias turned to Tragedy.
Permanently this time, please.
Vel felt his heart dip into his shoes. He had planned out an entire speech to keep the Inquisitor busy, strategized on the best ways to push his emotional triggers, and adopted a false smile. Chester had even claimed to have a failsafe in place, whatever that meant. But despite his efforts, the plan was unraveling around him. In a last-ditch attempt, he lurched forward, reaching out to grab the back of Elias's coat. Tragedy's fist intercepted him, striking him with enough force in the shoulder that he spun and landed on the floor, his recently healed back crying out in a tearing pain. Vel lay there, staring up at a massive chasm forming in the ceiling above him. Dust continued to fall as the building suffered another hail of cannon fire. So much for that contingency plan, eh? Tragedy shifted his head, cracking his neck and flexing the muscles around his shoulders.
Don't worry. This will all be over soon enough.
Chester winked at his own reflection that stared back at him from a shining surface. He had perused through all the piles of discarded metals and poked through every drawer in every storage container. There was precious little even worth stealing from this room, save for a small spool of gold wire and a few loose baubles of unknown purpose. He sighed as he checked his reflection once more, tucking away a loose hair. At a sizzling sound and the smell of smoke, Chester turned his head, looking about the room. Atticus was busy rolling around on a wheeled chair between the table that held the remains of his copper friend and a panel on the nearest robot. Perhaps it was because he was unfamiliar with how this process worked, but it didn't appear that the boy had destroyed anything.
Atticus, what are you doing? I thought we were here to dismantle these things.
He took a few steps closer, squinting a little at what the boy was doing. Berg's main core was removed. If I can reassemble his neural matrix and hook him up to a replacement power supply, I might be able to reboot his base functions. Chester ran a hand through his bangs.
I thought you said his memories would have corrupted by now.
Atticus stopped moving for a long moment, then continued, pretending as though he hadn't heard anything. Chester closed his eyes. This was foolish, and they were short on time as it was. But he resolved to let him try one last time.
Whatever you need, just let me know.
He leaned over, watching the boy twist two wires together before shoving them back inside the inanimate head of Berg. Atticus looked up, pushing on the lens of his magnifying monocle. Thanks. He reached for a nearby soldering iron when the sound of the door nearly bursting off its hinges distracted him. He looked up to see the silhouette of his teacher stalking in their direction. Chester put a hand on the boy's shoulder, squeezing it a little as he did.
Keep going here. I'll keep our guest entertained.
Elias took a moment to adjust to the darkness. The The few remaining lights helped illuminate the chaos of the shop, and his eyes fell across his favorite student hard at work at the head of his pet robot. He gave a sigh of relief at seeing that he had survived, but a pang of sadness struck him at the futility of Atticus's efforts. He let his hands fall to his sides.
"It's no use, Atticus. I'm afraid the process left nothing of your friend. You can't fix it."
"Now see, that's the problem with your attitude." Elias turned his head in the direction of the voice to see an unfamiliar man leaning against the frame of one of his machines, wearing a familiar smug smile, and he felt his patience begin to waver. Today simply was not his day.
"And what problem is that?"
Chester unfolded his arms and pulled away from the machine.
"You act like the boy's father, but a good parent supports their children in any endeavor."
He unsheathed his sword from its glittering scabbard and brandished it before him.
"And I'm afraid you've been a piss-poor substitute for the real thing."
Elias felt, for the first time that day, a smile tug at the corners of his own mouth.
"Me? A poor substitute?"
A chuckle fluttered past his lips.
"I have done nothing but encourage and nurture his innate talents. I provided him with resources, given him everything he needs to succeed, and set him on a path to become one of the greatest mechanists the world has ever seen."
"You stole his creations, killed his friend, and threw him away like he was garbage." Chester watched as Elias flourished his own military blade from beneath his robes. It wouldn't be long before this fight became physical.
"For that, you will have to answer to me."
His gaze flickered over to Atticus, who was busy reattaching wires from the replica to Berg. He would just have to keep the Inquisitor talking until the boy finished whatever it was he was doing.
"I did not cast him aside. That was an unfortunate accident."
Elias followed Chester's flickering gaze, and realization came to him.
"Ah, so you must be the man the cyborg spoke of, the one who raised Atticus and his sister into a life of—"
He paused, rolling the words around in his mouth for a moment. He used the flat side of his own sword to bat the other blade to the side.
"Petty thievery. Yes, I can see how that's more noble."
"Chester Quiverheart, at your service." Chester flourished out with his free hand, giving a slight, mocking bow. "Keep him busy, keep him talking, or fighting, don't die." He replayed his mantra as he straightened up, tightening his grip on the blade.
"Now, get the hell away from my kid." "Don't you ever give up."
Tragedy may have sounded bored, but the truth was he was enjoying this job a little too much. He wanted to smear this mechanical man across the floor and string him up as a warning to those who would disobey the High Inquisitor. He leaned over, reaching for the collar of the cyborg's shirt. Vel rolled out of the way, pushing himself to his hands and knees.
"No, but I've been told it's something I should work on."
He grunted as he kicked backwards with a booted heel, connecting with his captor's knee. Tragedy stumbled back slightly, but seemed more amused than injured. Before the cyborg could stand, he closed the distance and sunk a rib-shattering kick into Vel's side, sliding him across the floor several feet.
"Mechanical systems damaged. Left artificial kidney operating at 72% functionality."
"Not now, Amy."
Vel pushed himself to his feet in time to duck another blow aimed at his face. He felt Tragedy's knuckles whiff past his hair and he jumped back a step. He couldn't defeat the other man in a one-on-one fistfight. He was simply outmatched. But he couldn't keep dancing around, dodging and avoiding attacks either. It wasn't until he felt a firm set of arms wrap around him from behind that Vel's train of thought was derailed. He had been so focused on Tragedy, he had completely forgotten about the twin. He looked down to see Comedy's forearms locked across his chest, trapping his arms against his sides. Tragedy let out a bark of laughter.
"I was wondering when you were going to step in, little sis. Now, hold him still while I break his pretty face."
He flexed his shoulders as he began rolling the sleeves of his coat up around his elbows. Vel struggled against Comedy's iron grip, but she seemed nearly as strong as her brother. His right eye was starting to swell, making it difficult to even recognize his surroundings, much less dodge an incoming attack. His face was numb with pain, and there was an agonizing click in his left knee. All the while, the building shook, defenseless against the hail of increasing cannon fire from an artillery attack. At this rate, he might not survive long enough to get back to his brother. As tragedy began to approach, Vel clenched his eyes and braced for impact. Instead of recoiling around a balled fist, he felt himself flung to the side. His mechanical shoulder hit the ground, and he chanced a peak, hissing around the pain. His sight focused in time to see Comedy deflecting the punch and raising her leg, ramming the toe of her impressive boot into her brother's gut. As tragedy doubled over, Comedy smashed her elbow into the back of his skull, laying him out flat. She spun on Vel, finding him staring at her with a dumbfounded expression. "Get up, you idiot! You're running out of time!" Realization sank in as Vel climbed to his feet.
"Wait, you're Chester's operative?"
His hands fell open at his side with disbelief. Tragedy was already moving to push himself up. Comedy dropped one knee into the middle of his spine and wrenched his arm behind his back, prying forth a sharp cry of pain. "Your contingency plan, yes."
"Why the hell did you wait so long to step in?"
Comedy thrust out her free hand, the open palm striking Tragedy in the same spot her elbow had, and smacking his head into the hard floor. She looked over her shoulder at Vel, her mask hiding the fury on her face. "Because I assumed you could handle one simple mission."
"Simple?"
"Yes, and now you've gone and blown my cover. So you better get up there and stop the Inquisitor, or we are all screwed." Vel moved forward a step and paused. He watched Tragedy violently force himself upward, causing Comedy to backpedal away.
"Are you sure you don't—"
"Go!" He didn't need any further prompting. He dodged around Tragedy's outstretched hand and sprinted down the hallway, hopeful he could make up for lost time. Chester swung down in a wide slash, but Elias parried it by barely twitching the end of his blade. Elias frowned.
"Why don't any of you understand what I am doing? I'm trying to give you a paradise, and your first response is to fight against me."
Chester ducked to the side as Elias's sword pierced the air where his head had just been. He responded with a wild swing, only to find Elias already blocking the blow as though he knew it were coming.
"A pretty dream, but you don't understand the nature of people. Giving us a cage, no matter how luxurious, is still a cage."
Elias scoffed as the building shook from another round of cannon fire.
"You of all people should realize that isn't what this is. I want to save the people left behind by society, people like you and Atticus. I want to give everyone equal opportunity, provide them with comfort and safety. What is so wrong about that?"
Chester ducked around one of the stationary robots, using it as a shield to allow himself some time to breathe.
"All of that is achievable simply by investing in your people, helping those that need it, providing, as you said, education, comfort, and safety. That has nothing to do with military might. Equality doesn't come at the end of a sword."
Elias skirted the robot and dashed in.
"Indeed."
He thrust, sinking the tip of his sword into Chester's side, causing him to cry out and retreat, stumbling over a piece of forgotten machinery and colliding with a work table. Elias resumed his slow advance, considering the statement.
"Throughout history, people have shown that they are unwilling to change, and only do so when it is forced upon them."
Spoken like a true dictator. Chester swept his arm across the table he was leaning against, flinging handfuls of nuts and bolts at Elias. As the Inquisitor raised an arm to shield his eyes, Chester sprung forward, brandishing his sword. Elias moved a moment too late, and the edge cut a thin line of blood across his left arm. He twisted his blade, catching Chester's by the hilt and ripping it out of his hands, sending it skidding across the floor. His other hand whipped around, catching the thief across the cheek and sending him reeling backwards. Chester hit the floor hard. He glanced over to Atticus. The boy was still lost in his own world of numbers and wires. He grit his teeth and glowered at Elias.
Killing me will only make me a martyr. I've convinced the entire city that you are planning on letting them starve in exchange for your own wealth and prosperity. Your end will come bloody, one way or another.
A spasm curled Elias's upper lip into a snarl.
A martyr. No one will mourn your death, not even the boy.
He waved a lazy hand behind him.
You disgust me, criminal.
Chester scrambled away from the Inquisitor, scooting backwards across the floor. Elias shook his head and turned, completely disregarding the man at his feet. He began walking towards the table where Berg's remains lay.
Atticus, I'm afraid I need you to step away from that. We need to...
A gunshot rang out, and Elias stumbled forward, looking back in shock. Chester still sat on the ground, a pistol held in one hand.
I told you once, get the hell away from my kid.
Of Tyrants and Teakettles is Book 2 of the ongoing Sci-Fantasy series by author Lesley Herron. Join us as the adventure unfolds, with new chapters releasing every few weeks.
Let's see. A doodad, a gizmo, and a thingamabob. I swear, these science types have no taste for the finer things in life. Not even a brass coin to steal. Stingy bastards. Oh, what's this? Something shiny. Just a piece of metal. Still, not a bad reflection. I say, I do cut quite the figure in this get-up. Except, oh God, is that a grey hair?